Hey everybody, this is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont State Senate, here with my daily update on Vermont's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's Friday, May 29th. Today I'm going to be talking to Carol Dawes, who's the Barre City Clerk, on a topic which has been in the news a lot lately here in Vermont, but also nationally. And it's the question of how we make sure that we're able to carry out our elections safely and securely while we have all of this anxiety and uncertainty about the COVID-19 pandemic. So Carol, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And in addition to being the Barre City Clerk, you're also effectively the legislative leader for all the clerks across the state. Is that right?
We have an association, the Vermont Municipal Clerk and Treasurers Association, which is a membership organization, and I am chair of their legislative committee. So we represent our members, and obviously not every clerk is a member, but we do feel that we're a voice for all clerks throughout the state.
Great. Now, so I was a municipal official, so when I hear Barre City Clerk, it means a lot to me because I can get all municipal government and geek out. But in terms of the role of the clerk as it comes to elections, why don't you just briefly set the stage for what your role is in terms of the conduct of elections in Barre?
The clerk is the presiding officer with regards to elections in a community. It's the clerk that maintains the voter checklist and adds people to the checklist and works with the Board of Civil Authority on maintenance of the checklist and handles, ordering ballots and working with the select board or the city council on creating and approving the warning, which lists the ballot items for local ballots and prints the ballots, handles absentee requests and mailings, lines up election workers for the polling place, maintains the polling place, sets it up, and then of course runs the election on election day. I'm usually at our polling place somewhere between 5 and 5:30 that morning to make sure the coffee's plugged in at the very least. The polls open at 7 o'clock and we run straight through to 7 p.m. And, most of my job at that point in time is problem solving. Once the polls close, then you coordinate with the Board of Civil Authority, the counting, reviewing ballots for write-ins, voter intent, closing up the polls, getting everything put back together, and then in the following days dealing with posting election results, certifying elections. That's it in a nutshell. But
no, well, you made it sound pretty simple, but I'll tell you, I've run in elections. My first ever election that I stood for was a special election in July, and I was out there in scalding hot weather, and the turnout was very abysmal. I've also been in elections in March with snow falling and sub-zero weather, and all the while clerks are having to manage every wrinkle that comes up with every voter. But I think many people might not realize that the Secretary of State is effectively almost like a general manager, but then there are franchise owners who are out all across the state who actually are implementing the state's elections. So that's really helpful background. So let's jump right into, I don't want to call it a controversy because that's not really the way to frame it, but the question of using different tools to conduct our elections here in Vermont in light of COVID-19. And so back when we first had a state of emergency declared by the governor, the legislature quickly moved to act to allow municipalities in particular to have their elections conducted in different manners than normal, because we knew if you had to pass a municipal budget, it wasn't right to ask people to go to their normal polling stations, right, in late March when everyone was being told to stay home. So we were giving the flexibility to either do it by mail or postpone the dates, all sorts of different tools. That extended to the state elections through the end of the calendar year with a notable twist, which was, we said the Secretary of State and Governor have to agree on this.
Right.
The fundamental gap right now, as it appears to me, is when we talk about the general election in November. On the one hand, the Secretary of State says he's very concerned that People will be discouraged from voting in the normal way because of anxiety and fear about COVID-19 and wants to mail ballots to all of the eligible voters in some form. The governor says that may well be necessary, but let's wait until mid-August to make that decision, and maybe we'll have better information then, and maybe it won't even be necessary. But go ahead and print the ballots, order the paper, get the ink, do all that stuff, but let's just see what happens in August. Now that I've laid that out, tell me from your point of view, as someone who has to actually do all this, what, if we made no change in the law and required elections to be conducted as normal, what could be some of the problems? Not that there'll be a guarantee, but what would be some of the things that you would be worried about in that case?
Well, there's a number of things. Poll workers. I have a pool of dedicated poll workers who come and work elections. They check people off. They hand out ballots. They oversee the use of the tabulators, the vote counting machines, the scanners, and they are primarily older, retired, and so of course they're in the higher risk category. I'm concerned about two things: concerned about exposing them, and also concerned about them being willing to make the sacrifice to come work at an election. So I may have difficulty staffing a polling place. If I do have enough people to staff, I obviously would need to rearrange the way we poll. Thankfully, we're in a large building. I would be able to set up a traffic pattern where people came in one door, went out another door, but we would limit the number of people in the building at any one time. We would limit the number of people who can vote in the carousel voting booths that we have to maintain social distancing. Everybody would get a golf pencil as an example, so that they could each mark their ballot and then toss the pencil away, so that we don't have people handling the same writing utensil. We would require masks, because regardless of how much distance, I still have to hand you a ballot, or someone has to hand you a ballot, so there is some contact. And those things certainly concern me. Can we do these, and will we do these? Yes, because we will find ourselves, there will be in-person voting in November. And so we will have to address all those. But when you start taking into consideration the numbers that we're anticipating in November, a presidential year always has higher turnout. And I'm looking at probably 3,000 to 4,000 people coming to the polls in November. And if all of them have to go through those processes, the amount of time that it will take to get all voters through will be much longer. Likely we would have a long line still in place at 7 p.m. when the polls close. Anybody in line still gets to vote, but we would still have maybe hours until we could get everybody through.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine the rush. I mean, having been at the polls at all hours of the day at general elections, 7 to 10 in the morning is usually a fairly heavy, and then from about 4 to 7 p.m.
Yep.
And, if you've got lines of cars starting to queue up because people can only get through so far, it raises the question about how you float people through quickly enough that you can get to everyone. But in many communities, especially where the voting occurs in a central location, we're talking about potential clogging of roads. People who are desperate to show up. There are going to be people who very desperately want to vote against Donald Trump. There are going to be some who show up and desperately want to support him. And they're not going to leave, at least not willingly, if they can still be in line and vote.
Nor do we want them to leave. I mean, if people want to vote, we want to be able to, obviously, we want people to be able to exercise their right to vote. And that's one of my other big concerns is fear. I don't want anybody to be too afraid to come to the polls or too afraid and feel disenfranchised. And so as far as I'm concerned, the more opportunities we can put on the table, the better we are as far as making those offers to people. This is, you can vote this way or this way or this way or this way. So
yeah, I think it would be one thing if we were talking about the random germaphobe here and there, but when you're talking about the impact that this pandemic has had sort of on the group psyche, there'll be many people who rightly have in their mind that it might not be safe. So setting us, not to have you be the arbiter here between the governor and secretary of state, and I just want to be clear with people, you have not been the arbiter, because if you had, you would have failed because they did not reach an agreement. What is the reason, as you understand it, that the Secretary of State is concerned about waiting until mid-August after the primary election to decide how we would conduct the general election? You're someone who'll have to actually implement whatever the decision is. What is the case that the Secretary of State makes? Not asking you to do it for him, but
yeah.
You just articulate why he feels like we can't wait.
The main reason is that there are more moving parts than people think, and the sooner the arrangements can be made, the better. People aren't aware of the fact that, you know, you think November 3rd, that's months from now. Well, the ballots have to be ready in September, the end of September. And if the intention is to mail them out, or even just to have them available for clerk's offices to mail, along with all the supplies, the envelopes and stuff like that, all that stuff has to be ordered well in advance. I realize we can't print ballots until after the August primary, but we can order ballot stock, the paper. We can order the envelopes. That can be taken care of. And then if we were to go ahead with the proposal to mail ballots to everybody, there need to be contracts established with mailing centers, because it's not a simple stuff a ballot in an envelope and mail it to everybody. There are, I don't know how many different legislative districts, so that means different people on different lists get different ballots, and all of that has to be coordinated in advance. And then of course, coordination with the post office as a final step to get it out. So all those bits and pieces need to be put in place as soon as possible.
So it's not so much that it couldn't be done, it's that the risk of it not being done properly grows the longer you wait to make the decision. Is that
correct?
Kind of the fair assessment?
Yeah.
And so you are the chair of the membership association of many clerks, though not all, but many clerks throughout the state. I'm guessing that there's a diversity of opinion about how we should conduct things. What are those lively discussions that you have? I mean, I'm not sure if it would be like good reality TV to watch you guys debate these things, but what is the discussion like right now from those who actually do conduct our elections?
We think our lives are fascinating, but
yeah.
We're just clerk geeks. Yeah, there's a tremendous diversity, and the what's important to recognize, anybody who's gotten to know their town clerk, we're a group that is devoted to our communities and devoted to service to our communities. And we're 250 plus communities with completely different groups of people, completely different demographics. So it isn't one size fits all, and people do have differing opinions. There are concerns that they'll miss out on sort of the personal contact associated with doing it all in-house, with handling your ballots in-house. There's concerns about how to deal with the snowbirds and the college students, who in some communities, they have a huge number of college students, a big influx and a big outflow of college students. And how do you deal with that? Same with the snowbirds. There's concerns, that we hear about voter fraud, and that certainly is a concern. Thankfully, Vermont has a virtually no record of voter fraud, but it is something that comes up, and people are concerned about that. So on one side, we have people voicing those concerns, and on the other side, we have people voicing the concerns about, I want to make sure that my voters have as many opportunities as possible. I don't want people to feel forced to come to the polls. If we find ourselves, if, you know, God forbid, the middle of October, we're in another stay home, stay safe order, and people can't come to the polls. So there really are a number of different arguments and points of view in all directions. Every one of them valid. So it's difficult to find the right way through.
No, that's really helpful. I think articulating some of the views of your peers really does help flesh out that this is not doesn't need to be viewed through the lens of the deep ideological split at the national level between major political parties. The differences of opinion can be really operational questions and the types of questions that help explain what it means to participate locally and and what encourages more people to participate and what things might discourage people. If you hear some noise in the background, it's like I'm right over the screen right now. I'm watching what looks like a bad TV set where they dump buckets of water on the window. So if you hear that, that's what's going on. But
I can see the trees are going crazy behind you. So
yeah, it's like a typhoon here, but
it's coming our way here in Barre. So,
but Carol Dawes, Barre City Clerk, thank you so much. You really opened a window into this question that's before us about how to prepare a predictable plan for the general election in November. And for those of you who watching at home, thanks for joining. And one of the reasons this is a particularly interesting and timely conversation is the Senate will be weighing in on precisely this question, I believe, on Tuesday and Wednesday about whether we allow the Secretary of State to go forward and make decisions using his best judgment, or if we require more of a decision by committee approach about how elections are going to be run. Either way, unfortunately, there's the specter of partisanship, and that's hard to avoid at this point because the national debate has really pushed that so hard. But whether people vote yes or no in the Senate about letting the Secretary of State go forward this way, I'm confident because I know all the other 29 senators that they'll be doing it because they think it's the safest and secure approach, no matter where they come down on it. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on Monday at 5:30. And thanks for joining. And thanks again, Carol.
Thank you.